Hello everyone and welcome back to our ritual Mishnah Berurah. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Dalid, and Mitzvah Hashem today we will be learning Daf Rosh Pei Hey Amud Beis. We are continuing to learn the halachas of Rosh Chodesh. We pick up today at the top of Rosh Pei Hey Amud Beis with Siman Tav Chaf Dalid. Mitzvah Hashem we will learn Tav Chaf Dalid and do Sif Aleph of Siman Tav Chaf Hey. Today's share once again will be audio only. I'm looking forward to very shortly being back in front of the camera. Okay, so Siman Tav Chaf Dalid. Din Haskaras Yalav Yavai, the halachas that govern the insertion of Yalav Yavai b'Birkas Hamazayin in benching. Ubay Sif Echad, and here we have one Sif. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Mazkirin Yalav Yavai b'Birkas Hamazayin. We insert and we mention Yalav Yavai in Birkas Hamazayin, and we mispal to the Rabbeinu Shalom v'Zachrenu. He should remember us b'yom Rosh Chodesh hazeh. Says, no, let's go weiter in the Mechaber. V'im lo yamar, if you bench and you fail to say Yalav Yavai on Rosh Chodesh. By the way, this is very pertinent. I'm recording this share on Wednesday evening, going into Rosh Chodesh. So very perfect timing. V'im lo yamar, if you bench and you forget to say Yalav Yavai on Rosh Chodesh, Ein Machzirin Oisai, we don't make you go back and repeat Birkas Hamazayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kanalef, Ein Machzirin Oisai. Why is it that we don't repeat benching? Why is it that we don't have to go back for Yalav Yavai on Rosh Chodesh in benching? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, De Ein Chiyav Lechal Pas B'Rosh Chodesh. There is no obligation to have a Suda with pas, with bread, on Rosh Chodesh. There is no chiyuv of Suda. We learned that there is an inyan to be mar b'ktsas b'Suda, but there certainly is no chiyuv of Suda on Rosh Chodesh the way there is on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. So ein chiyuv lechal pas b'Rosh Chodesh, v'im kain, and if so, therefore, ibai, if somebody would have wanted to, lo yaviyachal pas, he wouldn't have eaten bread. You're not required to eat bread. You're not required to wash and eat bread and bench on Rosh Chodesh. V'loy nischayiv klal b'Birkas Hamazayin. Had you not washed, you wouldn't have had a chiyuv to bench in the first place, and you're not mechuyev to wash and eat bread on Rosh Chodesh. So basically, the explanation of this is very, very simple. Rosh Chodesh does not carry with it an obligation to wash, eat a suda with pas, and therefore a chiyuv to bench with Birkas Hamazayin, with Yalav Yavai. There is no chiyuv of Birkas Hamazayin with Yalav Yavai on Rosh Chodesh, because you don't have to eat pas and you don't have to bench. Now it's true, if you choose to wash and you choose to eat a suda with pas, now you have a chiyuv of Birkas Hamazayin, and because it's Rosh Chodesh, you're going to have to say Yalav Yavai. But it's not. You're not benching because it's Rosh Chodesh. You're benching because it happens to be that you chose to eat bread today. All right. Once you're benching, since it's Yalav Yavai, okay, we're going to tell you should insert Yalav Yavai into benching. But does Rosh Chodesh require benching with Birkas Hamazayin? No, because Rosh Chodesh doesn't require benching at all. So if you washed and you ate bread and you benched and you failed to say Rosh Chodesh, were you yoitza benching? Were you yoitza v'achalta v'savata uverachta? Absolutely. You benched. Oh, you didn't mention Yalav Yavai. Okay, that's no biggie, because you're not mechuyev to say Birkas Hamazayin and say Yalav Yavai on Rosh Chodesh. You have a chiyuv to bench, and if you're going to bench, we want you to say Yalav Yavai. Okay, your chiyuv to bench, you covered. You did bench. It wasn't a flawed benching. You were yoitza benching. You didn't say Yalav Yavai. Well, I didn't have to say Yalav Yavai because I didn't have to bench in the first place. That's the explanation of this. Okay. Says the Mechaber weiter. This happens very often. What happens if you're benching and you're supposed to say Yalav Yavai before Uvenei Yerushalayim? You forgot Yalav Yavai, and you say Uvenei Yerushalayim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amen. Baruch Atah Hashem, B'nei Barachim Yerushalayim Amen. And you did not yet start the next bracha. You didn't say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Okay, Lavinu Malkenu. You didn't say that yet. You're after B'nai Barachim of Yerushalayim. Amen. But you did not yet say you didn't yet begin the next bracha, and you remember that you forgot Yalav Yavai. What do? If you remember before you begin the next bracha of benching, the bracha called HaTorah HaMeitiv, then there's a way to be misakein, to fix up the fact that you forgot Yalav Yavai. How do you do that? With an interesting bracha. Omer, you say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shenasan Rosh Chodesh la'am Yisrael, who gave Rosh Chodesh to his nation, Klal Yisrael, Lizi Karoin, as a vehicle that the Rebbeinu Shalom should remember us, right? That's what we say, Yalav Yavai. We ask, V'zachrenu b'yom Rosh Chodesh hazeh. We ask that the Rebbeinu Shalom should remember us on Rosh Chodesh. So if we forgot Yalav Yavai, we make this bracha. Now, the Mechaber doesn't mention Shem Umalchus. He just says Baruch Shenasan Rosh Chodesh Lama Yisrael Zikarim. But this bracha is made with the Shem and Malchus. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam Shenasan Rosh Chodesh Lama Yisrael Lizikarim. And then you would go weiter in benching. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut and base. V'im nizkar Ayla El Siman Kuf Peiches B'Bir Halacha. Mishnah Berurah sends us back to the halachas of Birkas Hamazon, to tzarich loyma b'shem u'malchus, like I just mentioned, ayin sham. V'ayin sham oid b'sif yud le'inyan and beirach la'achar sheyotzer Rosh Chodesh. And now, the Mishnah Berurah is going to give us some interesting halachas over here, pertaining to benching with Yalav Yavai on Rosh Chodesh. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'ayin sham oid b'sif yud le'inyan and beirach la'achar sheyotzer Rosh Chodesh. Let's say Rosh Chodesh, like Rosh Chodesh El is going to be this year. Let's say Rosh Chodesh is on Thursday. Well, I don't like that example. Let's say Rosh Chodesh is Monday. Okay, so Monday is Rosh Chodesh. Okay, you wash for breakfast Monday morning, and you're going to bench. You're going to say Yalav Yavai. You wash for lunch Monday afternoon. You're going to bench. You're going to say Yalav Yavai. Now, let's say it's a winter month, so the Zmanim are early. Shkia, Tzeisa Kechavim, are very early. So Rosh Chodesh is going to be over relatively early. Let's say Rosh Chodesh is going to end 5:30 in the evening. Okay, 5 o'clock in the evening, you sit down to eat supper, and you wash, and you have a nice supper together with your family, and you're not ready to bench until 6 o'clock. So you started your meal when it was still Rosh Chodesh, but you ended your meal after Rosh Chodesh was already over. You ended your meal after the Zman. It's really no longer Rosh Chodesh. What do you do now? You began your meal, it was Rosh Chodesh, so technically this is a Rosh Chodesh meal. You're ending your meal when it's time to bench. It's not really Rosh Chodesh anymore. Do you say Yalav Yavai or not? That's the case that the Mishnah Berurah is addressing. If you're benching after Rosh Chodesh is already over, you still need to say Yalav Yavai in benching. Why? The basar hascholas haseuda azlinon, because we go after the beginning of the meal, and that was Shahaya B'Rosh Chodesh. If you started your meal while it was still Rosh Chodesh, then that meal carries with it a chiyuv of benching with Yalav Yavai. Even though you're not going to bench until actually Rosh Chodesh is over. Doesn't matter. You still say Yalav Yavai. Because of Oid HaMagen Avram Siman Taf Yud Tes of Katan Aleph, another interesting Magen Avram that says, Demispalel Arvis Shala'achar Rosh Chodesh. Let's say, again, let's use our case, that Rosh Chodesh was Monday. Okay, Monday night, you go to daven Ma'ariv, but you're not davening Ma'ariv Bizman. You're not davening Ma'ariv by Tzeisa Kechavim. You're davening an early Ma'ariv, right? You're doing Mincha Ma'ariv. You're davening an early Ma'ariv. Demispal Arvis Shala'achar Rosh Chodesh. Afilu ispal miba'od yom. If you already davened Ma'ariv, I'm going to call it the Ma'ariv of Motzei Rosh Chodesh. So Rosh Chodesh was Monday. You're davening Ma'ariv Monday night, but you davened an early Ma'ariv. You didn't daven Ma'ariv when it was truly Lila. You didn't daven Ma'ariv when it was really night. Shuv einoi mazkir achakach bebirkas hamazon shel Rosh Chodesh. You could no longer bench with the Yalav Yavai. In other words, you might have a Havamina like this. I davened really an early Ma'ariv. Really, it's still Rosh Chodesh because I davened Ma'ariv early. It's not really the Zman of Laila yet. So maybe now if I sit down and I wash and I eat a sandwich and I'm still benching before it's really night, maybe I should have to say Yalav Yavai. Says the Magen Avraham, no, that would be like a tarti desasri. That would be doing two things that are contradictory. Shaharei asoi choil b'tfilasai. You went ahead and you davened Ma'ariv. By davening Ma'ariv, you already said that it's night and it's the next day. You relied on the shittas, on the opinions that allowed you already to daven Ma'ariv. Well, according to those opinions, that means it's already night. So by davening Ma'ariv, you are going ahead and saying it's not Rosh Chodesh anymore. You're saying that it's the next day. You can't now go ahead and bench with Yalav Yavai. Aval, however, imuhu lo yispal. But let's tweak the case a little bit. Let's say you live in a town where there's one shul. This halakha that we're going to learn now is not so germane in our days nowadays. I mean, especially if you live in significant communities, right? You live in Borough Park, you live in Lakewood, there's a million shuls. Let's imagine that you live at a town and there's really one kehillah, there's one shul, there's one minyan, there's one tzibur. Says the Magen Avraham like this, Avalim hu lo yispala. Let's say the minyan that the tzibur has, they daven Ma'ariv early. And that's the only show in town. They daven Ma'ariv early. Now you happen not to like davening Ma'ariv early. You want to daven Ma'ariv Bizman. You don't want to have to repeat Kriya Shema after the Zman. You want to daven Ma'ariv with Berchas Kriya Shema Bizman, with Kriya Shema Bizman. You want to daven Ma'ariv when it's really night. So you chose to daven Yechidus. It's interesting that Rav Moshe has a tshuva in the Igros Moshe where he puts forth the question, if you're faced with the choice of Tefillah B'tzibur for Ma'ariv, but davening early, before the Zman, or davening Ma'ariv Bizman, but davening B'Yechidus, which one takes precedence? And Rav Moshe concludes in that tshuva, he says you could go either way. Tefillah B'tzibur is a mila, but davening Bizman is also a mila. So he says really you could go either way. It's not a slam dunk that you should go ahead and daven b'tzibur. So that's what's happening over here. The tzibur has one minyan. That minyan doesn't daven bizman. You want to daven bizman. So the tzibur already davened the Ma'ariv, but you did not. Now you sit down in your kitchen and you make yourself a sandwich. So you would think, what shaila do I have? I don't have a shaila. It's not really night yet. So it's really still Rosh Chodesh. I'm eating a sandwich. Why shouldn't I say Yalav Yavai? And I didn't bench yet. Oh, but the tzibur already benched. And you live in a town where there's one tzibur. In that case, the Magen Avraham says, you are dragged after the tzibur. Let's see what the Magen Avraham says here. Avalim hu lo yispal. Oh, actually, we're going to get to that case. First, the Mechaber is going to say, first the Magen Avraham is going to give us a case where you're not nigrar after the tzibur. Says the Mishnah Berurah, avalim hu lo yispal. If you did not yet daven Ma'ariv, aval pisha tzibur kvar hispalalu, even though the tzibur already did daven, and you might think that you are nigrar achar hatzibur, you might think that since you live in a town where it's a one-show town, and the tzibur already davened, so the tzibur already proclaimed by their davening that Rosh Chodesh is over, you might think you're nigrar after the tzibur. Says the Magen Avraham, no. Avalim hu lo yispal, afal pishat tzibur kvar yispalalu, einoy nimshach achareim. You're not dragged after the tzibur. V'tzarich lahaskir Rosh Chodesh b'berkas hamazon. You still have to say Yalav Yavai on the benching for your sandwich. So again, in this case, what happened? You're eating your sandwich before Tzes Kechav. You're eating your sandwich before the Zman. It's still Rosh Chodesh. But the tzibur already davened the Ma'ariv. They davened an early Ma'ariv. So are you stuck with the tzibur? Do you have to follow the tzibur since the tzibur already davened Ma'ariv? So it's like in your town, Rosh Chodesh is over because the tzibur already davened Ma'ariv? Says the Magen Avraham, no. But when is this true that you don't have to go after the tzibur? But that's only true if you started eating your sandwich before they davened. But if you sat down to eat your sandwich after the tzibur already davened ma'ariv, you started your sandwich after the tzibur davened ma'ariv, afilu ispalalu mi'ba'ayim, even though they're davening while it's still really daytime, einay maskil sharash chodesh b'berkas hamazon, you can no longer mention Yalav Yavai in Berkas Hamazon. So there's a case where you are nimshach achar hatzibur. There's a case where you're not nimshach achar hatzibur. If you don't start your meal until after the tzibur davened, then you're nimshach achar the tzibur, and then you can't say Yalav Yavai. If you started your meal before the tzibur, then you could still say Yalav Yavai. The Mishnah Berurah parses this even more now. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Chol Zabish Palel Al Kol Panim Mincha, and this whole discussion is only germane if you already davened mincha. Avalim lo yispal adai mincha, but let's say you didn't even daven mincha yet. So let's say the tzibur went ahead and davened ma'ariv after plag. They didn't wait till after shkia. They davened ma'ariv after plag, like a lot of people nowadays do on the Erev Shabbos. So the tzibur davened ma'ariv after plag. You didn't even daven mincha yet. You could daven mincha till shkia. You didn't even daven mincha yet. Avalim lo yispal adai mincha. If you didn't daven mincha yet, afilu maskelech al akar tfilos ma'ariv shal kol. Even if the tzibur davened ma'ariv by plag, you sat down to eat a sandwich after plag, but you didn't daven mincha yet. You certainly are going to have to say Yalav Yavai. The lekal meimer sheyimashach achar hakol. We can't say that you're going to be dragged after the tzibur, because if you're going to be dragged after the tzibur, that means you can't even daven mincha. For you, it's definitely still Rosh Chodesh. You didn't daven mincha yet. So very nice that tzibur went ahead and they davened an early ma'ariv. We can't say that you're nigrar achar tzibur if you didn't daven mincha yet. So for you, it's definitely still Rosh Chodesh. So are you going to say Yalav Yavai in your sandwich? You bet. V'tzarach al karka lahasker Rosh Chodesh b'tzilas hamincha. V'uad in ipcha, the same is true in reverse. Em hakol v'spalalu be'erev Rosh Chodesh ma'ariv b'ba'od yoyim. Rosh Chodesh is Monday. Sunday evening, the tzibur went ahead and they davened an early ma'ariv. V'hischelech al achar arvis, and you started to eat after their ma'ariv. Aval pi shehu lo yispal arvis, even though you didn't daven ma'ariv yet. Aval pi kein maskil sherish chodesh to nimshach acharei hakol. You're going to go be nimshach achar hatzibur. Miuim hu lo yispal mincha adayin, but if you didn't daven mincha yet of Sunday, ain't our maskil sherish chodesh. You can't mention Rosh Chodesh in your benching. Can't you also lihispal mincha shal chayil, because you're still going to daven a Sunday mincha. Kol zeh kasav amagin Avram betikuach reidim ledina. I remember we went through all of these cheshbainis back over there in Siman Taf Yud Tes. Okay, moving along to Siman Taf Chafei, Dina Rosh Chodesh Shachalu Yais B'Shabbos, the halachas of Rosh Chodesh on Shabbos, Ubay Gimel Seifim, and here we have 3 Seifim, says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Rosh Chodesh Shachalu Yais B'Shabbos, when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos. Arvis, Ma'ariv Friday night, Shachris, Shabbos morning, Mincha, Shabbos afternoon, Mispal Sheva, each one of the Shemona Esreis are going to be 7 brachas. That is the Shemona Esrei of Shabbos. Shemona Esrei of Shabbos by Ma'ariv, by Shachris, by Mincha, consists of 7 brachas. You have the Gimel brachas Harishonos of Shemona Esrei that are always the same, Avos, Gevuros, and Kedusha. You have the last 3 brachas of Shemona Esrei that are always the same, Avodah, Haidah, and Shalom. And then in the middle, we have a bracha for Shabbos that ends off Baruch Atah Hashem Kaddish Shabbos. Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, okay. Ma'ariv Friday night, Shachris Shabbos morning, Mincha Shabbos afternoon, Mispal Sheva. You're going to have the regular 7 bracha Shemona Esrei of Shabbos. But you're going to insert Yalav Yavai in the bracha of Ritzei, in the bracha of Avodah. Ve'enoi maskir shel Shabbos b'Yalav Yavai. Now, you might think, hey, I'm saying Yalav Yavai, I'm going to say Zachreini b'Yom Rosh Chodesh hazeh. Maybe I should also mention Shabbos in the Yalav Yavai. I mean, it's not only Yom Rosh Chodesh hazeh, it's also Yom Shabbos hazeh. Says the Mechaber, no, you don't mention Shabbos in the Yalav Yavai. I think I mentioned here recently the time that I was exposed to the story about elderly Yidden who were living in Siberia, who were not even, after, this is in the early 80s, this group of Yidden that were living in Siberia that were totally cut off from the rest of the world. They didn't even believe that there were Jewish communities around the world. They thought Jewish life had basically ceased to exist. they would daven a regular weekday Shemona Esrei on Shabbos, and they would say Yalav Yavai, and they would say V'zachrei b'yom Shabbos Aseh. They didn't know that there was a Shabbos Shemona Esrei. They thought, okay, it's Shabbos today, so you say regular Shemona Esrei, and you say Yalav Yavai, like you do on a Yom Tov. That's what they did. Fascinating. But, says the Mechaber, certainly Ve'ena Maskil Shel Shabbos b'Yalav Yavai, we don't mention Shabbos in Yalav Yavai. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Aleph Ve'ena Maskil Sherei Kvar Hiskir Shabbos b'Bracha Revius. Why would you be mentioning Shabbos in Yalav Yavai? The whole middle bracha of the Shabbos Shemona Esrei is dedicated to Shabbos. Baruch atah Hashem v'kadosh Shabbos. There's no need to mention Shabbos in Yalav Yavai. There's a Mordechai that says another reason. The Mordechai says there's another very basic reason why you don't mention Shabbos in Yalav Yavai. Every single Shabbos Shemona Esrei all year has the bracha of Avodah. The bracha of Avodah is the first of the last three brachas of Shemona Esrei. Every Shabbos tefillah has a bracha of Ritzei. Do we ever mention Shabbos in the bracha of Avodah on Shabbos? No. So why suddenly now, because it's Rosh Chodesh, should we have a Havamina that we should mention Shabbos in the bracha of Avodah? The Mordechai is like puzzled. He doesn't even know why there would even be as a Havamina. There's no Havamina for it. It wouldn't make any sense. Weiter in the Mechaber, it says the Mechaber now he's going to start discussing the leining of Rosh Chodesh on Shabbos. Umaytzi and Shnei Svarim, we take out 2 Sifrei Torah when it comes time for leining. V'karin barishain shiva b'seder hayom. In the first Sefer Torah, we lein the 7 aliyahs that we need to lein for the parsha of Shabbos. So we break up the parsha into 7 aliyahs. That's going to be the first Sefer Torah. Ubasheni, and in the second Sefer Torah, kairei maftir, we're going to call up another oila number 8. He's going to be the maftir, and we're going to lein by him ubiyom HaShabbos uberosh Chodeshechem. So we discussed at great length in the previous year the leining of Rosh Chodesh. We described how the leining of Rosh Chodesh is comprised of 3 different parshiyos in the Torah. The second parsha of the Rosh Chodesh leining is 2 psukim. Ubiyom HaShabbos, it mentions the carbon musaf of Shabbos. Nothing to do with Rosh Chodesh. It's 2 psukim that describe the carbon musaf of Shabbos. Then the last parsha in the Rosh Chodesh leining is Uberosh Chodeshechem. That's the parsha that actually describes the carbon musaf that is brought on Rosh Chodesh. So when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, we lein a maftir for Rosh Chodesh, but we don't start that maftir by Uberosh Chodeshechem. We don't lein a maftir that only discusses the carbon musaf of Rosh Chodesh. Now, really, we could have done that because there are enough psukim, right? We did the math yesterday. In order to have an aliyah, you have to have a minimum of 3 psukim, but in the parsha of Uberosh Chodeshechem, you have more than 3 psukim. So really, for the maftir on Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos, we really could have started the leining with Uberosh Chodeshechem and lein about the carbon musaf of Rosh Chodesh, but we don't. We go back 2 psukim, and we start from Uviyom HaShabbos, and we mention the carbon musaf of Shabbos. Now, this is very interesting when you think about it, because we don't do this all the other Shabbos of the year, right? Really, it would have been appropriate that every Shabbos of the year we should lein maftir, and we should lein ubiyom HaShabbos, and we should lein about the carbon musaf of Shabbos. Isn't that what we do on every Yom Tov? On Pesach, we have a maftir. We have psukim that describe the carbon musaf of Pesach. On Sukkot, we have a maftir, the carbon musaf of Sukkot. On Shavuos, we have a maftir, the carbon musaf of Shavuos. So how come on Shabbos, on every Shabbos, we don't have a maftir, the carbon musaf, musaf of Shabbos? We don't. We don't do that. It's only on Rosh Chodesh. When Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, so we're going to lein a maftir, and we're going to lein about the carbon musaf for Rosh Chodesh. We also add on Ubiyom HaShabbos, and we lein about the carbon musaf of Shabbos. Why don't we do this all year round? One answer is because we have a technical problem, and that is that the parsha that describes the carbon musaf of Shabbos is only 2 psukim, so it can't be an aliyah. So we don't really have a way to do it. It's not an aliyah. What are we going to do? Keep on leining and lein the parsha of the carbon musaf for Rosh Chodesh? So at every Shabbos, we're going to lein the carbon musaf of Shabbos and the carbon musaf of Rosh Chodesh? Not very appropriate. So there's no way for us to only lein the carbon musaf of Shabbos. That's one reason why we don't do it. Another reason that's brought down why we don't do it is because it would be very awkward. If the maftir of every single Shabbos of the year would be the Karban Musaf of Shabbos, then the HaTorah of every Shabbos would have had to be something that has to do with the Karban Musaf of Shabbos. Because the HaTorah from the Navi is supposed to have something to do with what we lein at the end of the parsha, what we lein the last aliyah of Maftir, and that would be strange. So therefore, these are the reasons why we don't lein every Shabbos ubiyom HaShabbos, but once on Rosh Chodesh, if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, so we were already gonna lein u'b'rosh chodeshechem, we back up 2 psukim and we lein ubiyom HaShabbos and u'b'rosh chodeshechem, going back into the Mechaber ad soif parsha until the end of the parsha of u'b'rosh chodeshechem. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Oiskan Beis. So we take out the first Sefer Torah and we lein Shiva b'Seder Hayom. We lein 7 aliyahs in that week's parsha. Whatever parsha it is that week, we lein 7 aliyahs. The lechatchila ein mafter oila l'minyan Shiva k'tela'el Siman Reish Pei Beis Sif Daled, where we were back learning Chela Gimel and we were learning all about the davening on Shabbos and the leining on Shabbos. We said that really you only need 7 aliyahs on Shabbos. This that we have 8 aliyahs is a little bit strange. Right? We need the person who has the last aliyah is also gonna, in the original takana, is gonna be the one who's gonna lein from the Navi. Now really we didn't have to add an aliyah for that. Really we could have had 7 aliyahs in the parsha, and then we could call up an 8th person to just lein from the Navi. It wasn't really necessary that the person who's gonna lein from the Navi had to have an aliyah in the Torah. So really, if we're talking in the context of Hilchot Shabbos and in the context of the halachas of Kriyas HaTorah, really on a regular Shabbos, we only need 7 aliyahs. We could break up the parsha into 7 aliyahs, then say Kaddish, and then call up somebody to lein the HaTorah from the Navi. We don't need 8 aliyahs. Why do we have 8 aliyahs? Because if we would do that, if we would only have 7 aliyahs in the Sefer Torah, and then we would call up person number 8, and he would only lein from the Navi, we would be equating Navi with Chumash. We would be saying that in stature, they're both the same. Just like we have people who get aliyahs and they lein from the Sefer Torah, 7 aliyahs in the Sefer Torah, so too we have an aliyah number 8, and he only leins from the Navi. So it sounds like the Navi and the Sefer Torah are the same, but they're not. How do we show that? We have 7 aliyahs in the parsha, and then the fellow who's going to lein the Navi, we give him an aliyah in the Sefer Torah also. So there's no such thing as an oila only for Navi. But that's why we have 8 aliyahs. Really, we don't have to have 8 aliyahs. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is pointing out over here in Noise Cut and Base. He says the first Sefer Torah that we take out of Rosh Chodesh, we're going to lein Shiva b'Seder Hayom. We're going to have the 7 basic obligatory aliyahs in that week's parsha in the Sefer Torah. The lechatchila in after limud Shiva could lay also Reish Pei Beis of Talmud. Number 8, we have to give him an aliyah in the Torah, so we're going to give him u'b'rosh chodeshechem to lein a maftir about the Karban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, and then to lein from the Navi. Whenever we take out 2 Sifrei Torah, so we have the 7 aliyahs in the Sefer Torah. Now we close the Sefer Torah, and we take the second Sefer, put it on the bima next to the first Sefer, and the Balkarei is going to say a Chatzi Kaddish over both Sifrei Torah. Continues the Mechaber. Umaftirin, 4 lines into the Siman, Umaftirin hashamayim kisi. What's the HaTorah from the Navi going to be on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh? Beautiful section of psukim from Yeshaya Perek Samach Vav. Hashamayim kisi v'ha'aretz hadoim raglai. That is the HaTorah, says the Rishorah Kat Daled Umaftirin hashamayim shesham nizkar me'ein Rosh Chodesh. Because we have a pasuk in that section of Navi that mentions Rosh Chodesh. The pasuk says v'haya midei chodesh b'chodshoi. So there's a mention of Rosh Chodesh. That's why that's the HaTorah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'imshachach l'kara b'HaTorah shel shvua. Let's say the Gabbai was a little bit sleepy, and when it came time to lein the HaTorah, they did not lein Hashamayim Kisi, and instead they leined the regular HaTorah of that parsha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what do? Kara acharei Hashamayim Kisi. Well, after you finish that HaTorah, you're going to have to lein Hashamayim Kisi. V'im nizkarach shekfar berach brachas achronos. Let's say the person who had maftir made the first brachas on the HaTorah, Asher bachar b'neviyim tovim v'ratzah b'divreihem ha'ne'emarim be'emes, and he leined the HaTorah, and then afterwards he made the closing brachas on the HaTorah. Etc., etc. What do you do then? Now somebody woke up and said, Oi, Hashemayim Kissi, says the Mishnah Berurah, well, you'll lein Hashemayim Kissi without brachas. Continues the Ramah in the parentheses. V'imazkir shal Rosh Chodesh, ayin le'el siman reish pei dal sif beis. As to the question, in the closing brachas on the Navi, the closing brachas on the HaTorah, should you mention Yom Rosh Chodesh Hazeh? Right? We have one of the brachas on the HaTorah. Al Torah, Al Avodah, Al Yom HaShabbos Hazeh. Should we also say Al Yom Rosh Chodesh Hazeh? Should we mention Rosh Chodesh in the closing brachas of the HaTorah? Says the Ramah, Ayin Le'el Siv Reish Pei Dal Siv Beis, and over there, it says that we do not mention Rosh Chodesh, and the reason we don't mention Rosh Chodesh is because Rosh Chodesh does not demand a HaTorah. So it doesn't pass to mention Rosh Chodesh in the brachas of the HaTorah. What does the HaTorah have to do with Rosh Chodesh? Ma'ayin Shmita Eitzel Har Sinai. Rosh Chodesh doesn't bring a HaTorah. Shabbos brings a HaTorah. Oh, Shabbos brings a HaTorah, and it happens to be Rosh Chodesh? Okay, so we'll lein Hashemayim Kissi, because it mentions but the HaTorah is not here because of Rosh Chodesh. The HaTorah is here because of Shabbos. Therefore, it wouldn't pass to mention Rosh Chodesh in the brachas of the HaTorah. Continues the Mechaber. Chutz meRosh Chodesh Elul shechal liyos b'Shabbos. I love the way we're mentioning this on the night of Rosh Chodesh Elul. Chutz meRosh Chodesh Elul shechal liyos b'Shabbos shemaftirin aniyas sayara. If Rosh Chodesh Elul falls out on Shabbos, we don't lein Hashemayim Kissi, so paskins the Mechaber. Instead, we lein Aniyah Sayara from Yeshaya. Why is that? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Hay, Shamaftirin Aniyah, Mibnei She'en Ladalik Shiva Dinechemta, Ein Lekaman Sivatav Chav Ches, Sif Ches. We know that the HaTorah of Aniyah Sayara is one of the HaTorahs that we pull from Sefer Yeshaya that are consolation to Klal Yisrael. And during this time period, after Tisha B'Av, we have 7 weeks where we have the Shiva Dinechemta. We have 7 HaTorahs that are conciliatory towards Klal Yisrael. And it's so important to lein the Shiva Dinechemta that we're not going to take out one of the Shiva Dinechemta to replace it with Hashemayim Kissi because of Rosh Chodesh. That is the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. However, says the Ramah, Haga, for Yeshayim Hashemayim Kissi, but there are those that say that no, we do take out Aniyah Sayara, and instead we're going to replace it with Hashemayim Kissi. Continues the Ramah, that is the minig in these regions. Now, having said that, says the Mishnah Berurah, why would we say Hashemayim Kissi and not Aniyah Sayara? I would taking out one of the Shiva Dinechemta. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, the HaTorah Zu Yesh Patarti. Because the truth is that the HaTorah of Hashemayim Kissi checks off both check boxes. It checks off Rosh Chodesh and Shiva Dinechemta. Why? Because you have it at Zichron Rosh Chodesh. You have Ayimid Chodesh B'Chodshai. V'Nechamais Yerushalayim. You also have a pasuk that is conciliatory towards Yerushalayim and Klal Yisrael, and that is the pasuk that says, Simchu es Yerushalayim. You should rejoice with Yerushalayim. V'gilu ba kol oyhaveha. And all of those who love Yerushalayim should rejoice in Yerushalayim. Ois Cotton Zion. V'chein noyagin. B'betinas elu, the Ramah said, says the Mishnah Berurah V'kasvar Achrayim. The Achrayim write off a pikain. Having said that, having seen this Ramah that says that the minig is that we do take out Aniyah Sayara and we lay in Hashemayim Kissi instead, still in all, say the Achrayim Dafa Bikain, Ein L'dalig Achas Mishiva Dinechemta. We really don't want to replace one of the Shiva Dinechemta, and therefore what should we do? Valkain, Kishiyaftiru B'Parshas Teitzei. When we come to Parshas Kiseitze, Berani Akara, the HaTorah of Parshas Kiseitze is the section of Yeshaya, Rani Akara. That is the parsha in Yeshaya right before Aniyah Sayara. So you know what? When you come to Parshas Kiseitze and you lein Rani Akara, keep on going and lein Aniyas Sayara. Yisaimu gam ba'aniyas Sayara haksuva achareha. So that way, we're not going to totally lose out on one of the Shiva Dinechemta. Continues the Rama. Av Rosh Chodesh Av Shechaliyas b'Shabbos. Till now, we were talking about when Rosh Chodesh El falls out on Shabbos. How about if Rosh Chodesh Av falls out on Shabbos? What do we lay? Do we lein Hashemayim Kissi, or do we lein from Yirmiyah Shimu Shamayim? Says the Ramah, Av Rosh Chodesh Av Shechaliyas b'Shabbos Maftirin Shimu. Then we lein Shimu Shamayim from Yirmiyah and not Hashemayim Kissi. But the Yeshayim Hashemayim Kissi. But there are those that disagree and say no, we should lein Hashemayim Kissi v'chein Iker b'makom v'shein minig. And the Ramah says if there is no pre-existing minig, that would be the Iker, would be to replace Shimu Shamayim with Hashemayim Kissi for Rosh Chodesh. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chein Iker b'makom v'shein minig. V'ayin b'bir agrosh adachas for azumi halacha pasuk gedei rishonim the maftir shimu. The Gra disagrees with this very strongly and says that we should lein shimu. Let's finish Sif Aleph here in the Shulchan Aruch. V'im iru Rosh Chodesh bar b'parshiyos. If Rosh Chodesh falls out on one of the Dalit parshiyos, Parsha Shkolim, Parsha Zachar, Parsha Spara, maftirin b'shal parsha, then you lein the HaTorah of the Arba parshiyos, not the HaTorah of Hashemayim Kissi. Come on, Siman Taf Reish Pei. Hey, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with Sif Beis. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. Exclusive Limud HaTorah should be being against Klai Yisrael, the Baruch Shem Shen. Yeshua the first part also Jiduchim Dolos in need. We should be to see the Biaskel Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.